Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. If you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now on to today's topic. This is kind of a Bonnie and Clyde era bank robbery type story, or it gets into bank robberies a little ways in. So this is the story of the Fleagle Gang and their buried treasures in Kansas and parts of the Midwest and also in California. So the Fleagle family, they came from Iowa. They came out to the western flatlands of Kansas, and so they settled out in western Kansas, I believe out by Garden City, Kansas. And the family included four brothers. The two oldest brothers were hardworking and they stayed out of trouble and did the things that they should be doing. And the two youngest brothers, Ralph and Jake, they would grow up to become some of the most notorious outlaws of the early 1900s. The two brothers, they traveled to San Francisco where Jake became a card shark, and later on Jake was then arrested in Oklahoma for burglary and served a year in the Oklahoma State Prison. And once he got out, his brother Ralph was waiting there to pick him up, and they headed back to Garden City, Kansas. And soon after, neighbors were noticing peculiar things going on at the family farm. The family seemed to be acquiring things like tractors and cattle and stuff like that at a pretty alarming rate. And they even had either bought a new house or had a new house built. Just they acquired a lot of stuff in a very short period of time, and it seemed pretty peculiar to a lot of people around there. So the brothers, though, had convinced the family that they were doing well in the stock market, and that's how they could afford all these things and the money to fund all this stuff that they had acquired. So little did the family know that Jake was the leader of a gang of gunmen that were terrorizing the western states. They operated a lot in the Sacramento Valley of California, and they raided big money gambling houses and big money games, and did stuff like that where they were bringing in a fair amount of money in one shot. And when the heat was on, they would return to Kansas. And Jake would spend a lot of his money as he got it, but Ralph was a lot more frugal with his ill-gotten gains, and he buried a lot of his loot. And he was said to have buried a lot of it in California, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. And the authorities estimated that the Fleagle gang was responsible for about 60% of the robberies in California and Kansas during the 1920s. So the brothers had rented a home close to the family farm in Kansas, and they were using it now to plan their heists. And they decided next that they would take on the First National Bank of Lamar, Colorado, not too far from home, but across state lines. And one of their gang members was a San Quentin prison escapee, and his name was Corazon Gargillo. And his job was to case the bank, and other members of the gang were George Absher of Colorado and Howard Royston of California. So Jake had got superstitious about this upcoming bank robbery, and he delayed it a few times, and this made Corazon get pretty upset and tired of waiting, and he eventually left the gang. And not too long after he left the gang, the FBI caught up with him, and he was dead a few days later from a shootout with the FBI. So once the robbery did take place, the gang netted about $220,000, and they still had yet to fire their weapons. So of all their robberies and everything, they had never fired their weapons yet. But today would be different. And the bank president from his office fired at Royston with his .45 and hit him in the jaw. And Jake fired back and then killed the bank president, Mr. Parrish. Then the bank manager's son raced to defend his father, and Jake killed him too. And in the panic, the alarm was sounded and the gang escaped. And they took two hostages with them. They took Everett Kessinger and Ed Lundgren. So the sheriff was in close pursuit because the alarm was sounded, and the gang was trying to escape, and they managed to put a bullet into the sheriff's radiator, and this caused the sheriff's car to lose power, and they were able to escape. And when they got well outside of town, they left Ed on the side of the road, but they kept Kessinger. They kept him, I guess, in case they needed him. So the gang entered Kansas with Royston on the floorboards in pain from his bullet to the jaw. And once they were back on the ranch, the brothers had buried some of the money, and then they tied up Kessinger. And then they called a doctor to assist Royston. I believe they used the ruse that a boy had his foot smashed by a tractor to get the doctor to go ahead and come out late in the day. And eventually the doctor never returned home, so the townspeople were searching for the doctor when he didn't come home, and he was eventually found, I believe, by a plane that was up in the air searching for the bank robbers and flying around the area. And this plane spotted the doctor's Hudson automobile in a nearby ravine, and the doctor's body was found near the car too. So he was tied up and blindfolded and gagged, and he had been shot in the head. And a few days later, Kessinger's body was found in the same condition outside of Liberal, Kansas. So when the police examined the doctor's car, they found fingerprints on it that didn't belong to the doctor, and I believe they had arrested a transient that they thought may have been responsible, but then I believe his fingerprints didn't match those prints either, and they had sent the prints off to the FBI. And since Jake had served time at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, his prints were on file, and they were finally able to link a print from Jake on the doctor's car to link the Fleagle gang, and so now they knew for sure who was responsible, for the doctor's murder, and they were pretty sure they were the bank robbers and everything too. But by this point, it takes a while for the prints to come back and everything. The gang had escaped to Minnesota, and I believe Royston had seen a dentist or a doctor there to get help for his shot in the jaw, and the gang had split up and gone their separate ways. So quite a bit of time had passed by this point. But the police raided the family farm, and they found out Ralph had an address in Illinois, and he was surprised there, and they took him into custody, and I believe he started to talk. And then they found the other two gang members and arrested them also, and I believe they were trying to lead normal lives at this point. But there was no sign of Jake Fleagle yet, until they put out a $25,000 reward and put wanted posters in just about every town around the Midwest. And eventually police in Branson, Missouri caught up with him, and he was gunned down, and I believe he died on the scene of the gunfight in Branson, Missouri. And so the remaining gang members, they were all hanged at a penitentiary in Canyon City, Colorado. But Ralph Fleagle, he had buried a lot of loot in a lot of different places, and there had been evidence of this, and a couple of them have been found. There was one that was found in 1952 in Nebraska. There was another treasure loot, or whatever you want to call it, that he had buried that was found in Murrieta, California. There was another one in 1961 that was unearthed in Kansas, and there's supposed to be many more in the Inland Empire of Southern California, and some around Garden City, Kansas, and maybe in some other surrounding states still. There was also a bank robbery in Nebraska that netted the gang $100,000, and it was said that this money was also buried by Ralph Fleagle. And it's said that it is either on Ralph Fleagle's ranch, where he lived before he was captured, or it was in the area of Battle Canyon in the Badlands of Logan and Scott County, Kansas. So there are supposedly many other buried treasures out there, but this was one that had even more specific locations tied to it, and I don't know how people know. I guess after the robbery, maybe they know where they saw them or whatever, and assumed they had an idea where that treasure may have been buried. But that is the story of the Fleagle Gang, and I believe this gang, it was about the first time that the FBI had used fingerprints to convict gang members, or to convict anyone from fingerprint evidence, and that all happened from Jake's fingerprint he left on the doctor's car, which tied everything together. So if you like these kind of stories, like and subscribe to my channel.